So yesterday was a historic vote in Parliament on whether to support the SNP's amendment to call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Shamefully, most of our politicians voted against peace and saving innocent lives. MPs voted 293 to 125. I just want to say to those 125, thank you for being on the right side of history. With a majority of 168 to reject the SNP's King's Speech amendment calling for all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now, 56 Labour MPs voted for the amendment. Good for them. And you can probably guess who they are. Of course, most of the left made the right decision. It also included 10 frontbenchers who had to resign. So if you didn't know, Keir Starmer used a 3-line whip to vote against the amendment because, well, he's disgusting. And now he's lost 10 members of his shadow cabinet. Surprisingly, Jess Phillips was among those who resigned in order to vote for a ceasefire, which to me is the biggest surprise that came from yesterday. Credit where credit is due. I mean, did she do it for tactical political reasons? Who knows, maybe. But at the end of the day, her record will go down in history as being on the right side of this. Over 70% of the country supports a ceasefire, yet most of our MPs voted to continue the violence. We are not represented by these self-serving bastards. Our system is completely broken. So even though this is actually an incredibly simple issue, there are those out there who are trying to muddy the waters and overcomplicate it, and that there are actual viable reasons to not support a ceasefire. The Jewish Labour movement tweeted this: Keir Starmer showed leadership and stood by a principled position that is rooted in reality tonight. We urgently need to see an end to suffering in Gaza, but we can't impose a ceasefire unilaterally. We can't risk abandoning hostages and leaving Hamas's terrorist rule intact. Conservative tweeter Chris Rose said this: a whopping 56 Labour MPs voted for the ceasefire amendment tonight. That's 56 Labour MPs who voted for Israel to stand down whilst Hamas regroups. Shame on all of them. We also have a video from Labour MP Kim Lebeer on her justification for not voting for a ceasefire.
Hello, I'm Kim Lebeer, the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, and I just wanted to send out a short message ahead of the vote in Parliament this evening, which sets out my position clearly. Of course, I want a ceasefire in Gaza. Which human being on this planet wouldn't? But what I won't be doing this evening is voting for the SNP amendment. And the reason I won't be doing that is because even if I did, nothing would change. There is no quick and simple solution to the crisis in Gaza. We have to set out a framework which leads towards that much needed ceasefire. And I believe that's what the Labour Party amendment does. This has probably been the hardest day of my relatively short political career, but that is nothing compared to the pain and suffering of the people involved in the attack on October the 7th and the suffering now that we're seeing in Gaza. We have to work towards a solution to alleviating that pain for everybody, releasing the hostages, getting rid of Hamas, and ending the pain and suffering of the people of that region who have suffered for far too long. That's why I'll be doing what I'm doing this evening.
So there are multiple arguments here. I'm going to go through each of them. The first one is that, it won't make a difference whether Parliament calls for a ceasefire or not. Therefore, why support it? I mean, that is an incredibly stupid argument to make. It won't happen, therefore don't bother. Well, if UK representatives made a statement calling for a ceasefire, that could, even though, yes, a slim chance, put pressure on Israel. However, it would definitely embarrass them and show that they are out of touch. Now, if the UK and the US called for a ceasefire, that would have a very significant impact on Israel. And ironically, if Joe Biden came out and supported a ceasefire, our MPs would 100% pivot. Keir Starmer would definitely pivot. But I find this argument really funny because apparently calling for a ceasefire is relevant. Yet those same people spend 24 hours of the day asking everyone to condemn Hamas as if that would make a material difference. It's funny that. Another one is that a ceasefire actually emboldens Hamas, and Israel needs to continue to bomb and murder innocents, including babies, in order to defeat Hamas. Now, it's very difficult to defeat Hamas, maybe not even possible, yet we still allow people to be killed. A ceasefire literally stops the killing. So if you want to see Israel continue its bombing campaign, then don't pretend to care about innocents and just admit that eradicating Hamas is just revenge for what happened on the 7th of October. And even if it was possible to finish Hamas, at what cost? Currently, the death toll of Palestinians sits around 15,000. The position of the Labour Party is what they call a humanitarian pause, but let's drop the pretense of it being humanitarian, because it's not. The pause, which is what Labour are calling for, is the same policy that is currently being put in place by Israel. They are pausing for 4 hours per day whilst telling those living in Gaza to move south, then they continue the bombing. So 4 hours isn't a meaningful amount of time. How can we expect UN workers to do their jobs and look after innocent Palestinians when they know in 4 hours' time the bombs will be raining again? Secondly, this pause is actually propaganda that Israel cares about innocents. In reality, they are forcing Gazans out of their homes. They are making them flee. This is ethnic cleansing. For Israel, it's a win-win situation. Either Palestinians move south, or they are killed when the pause is over. Israel's only mission is to completely take control of Palestine and expand Israel into it. That's why anything other than a ceasefire is supporting genocide. Now, those of us who support an immediate ceasefire have been accused of being irrational, emotive, rather than logical. Yet this is pure projection. A ceasefire and a peace settlement is messy. Of course, we don't want Hamas in control, just as I don't want the far-right Netanyahu in power, but a negotiation has to happen. So that means putting aside your emotions and speaking to people you despise for the greater good. However, not supporting a ceasefire because you really want Hamas gone, regardless of who gets killed, that's irrational and insane. Another argument is that a ceasefire means hostages aren't released. Again, it's another stupid argument. The point of a ceasefire is not to just stop the conflict, stop the killing, but it's to come to a peace settlement, and that is where you address the hostage situation on both sides as well. Because right now, it's very likely that Israel is killing their own hostages by bombing indiscriminately, but Netanyahu doesn't care about the Israeli hostages. These arguments do the bidding of a genocidal maniac. And it's also worth mentioning that Netanyahu quite literally emboldened Hamas. This is from the Times of Israel. For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas, or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government, from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. Thus, amid this bid to impair Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organisation with which Israel had indirect negotiations via Egypt, and one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad. He isn't interested in keeping Israelis safe. He is interested in having an enemy to justify an apartheid state, to justify killing tens of thousands of people, to reach the goal of eliminating all Palestinians and wiping Palestine off the map. Every single MP that failed to vote for a ceasefire voted to support this. They voted to support ethnic cleansing and thousands of innocent people dying. We are governed by genocide-supporting monsters, and we can never, ever let them forget that.